Okay, hello everybody. This is Brandon Gaitan with the Charter Authority. We'd like to welcome you to our annual training on the Nevada School Performance Framework, also known as the NSPF or Annual School Star Ratings. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. I did set this training to be recorded, so we will provide the recording link and presentation to you after the meeting. It looks like everyone's muted at this time, but please keep yourself on mute. And if you have a question or comment, feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat, and we will periodically pause to review that. First, we can introduce ourselves. I think a few of you were on our call last week, but essentially we're the data and reporting team for the SPCSA. We typically refer to ourselves as the assessment and accountability team. There's our mission sort of in the first bullet. Essentially, we help schools meet deadlines and submit accurate data. As to the team members, Selchuk is the supervisor for the team. Brandon, that's me. I'm the primary contact for school accountability topics. And then Mary, who's also on the line, is the primary contact for assessment topics. So here we provide an overview of the presentation. On the left are the outcomes. We hope we will enhance your knowledge of the NSPF, including its purpose and the performance it measures. We also want you to be able to interpret an NSPF star rating report, as well as understand how schools can be identified into and exit out of low performance designations. And then finally, we want you to be able to find additional information if you need it. And then those outcomes align with the agenda. The first section is going to outline the purpose and history of the NSPF. The second and third will go into more detail about how the NSPF functions and the performance it measures. In the fourth item, we'll look through NSPF star rating report, and then we'll follow that with a discussion of the identification and exit rules for low-performing schools. And then the last two items will look to the future and provide some resources. So we're going to start by outlining the purpose of the NSPF. First, the Federal Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, requires all states to use an accountability system to annually rate all public schools within that state, and also to identify schools with low performance or low performing student groups. Nevada statute is generally aligned with these requirements and sets out additional details. Beyond the statutory requirements, state accountability systems are a general best practice that serve many purposes that are outlined on the slide here. As to the history of the NSPF, the Nevada Department of Education created the Nevada School Performance Framework to fulfill those requirements I mentioned under that are outlined under federal law, or ESSA. The current NSPF was designed with significant stakeholder input, which is still ongoing, and this has produced a system that the Nevada Department of Education says reflects Nevada values. So at this point, we've discussed the purpose and history of the NSPF. Next, we'll move to an overview of the NSPF and outline a few of its basic principles. So at the very highest level, each public school is issued an annual index score and corresponding star rating based on that school's performance on various measures over the prior school year. These ratings are published annually by the NDE, typically around September 15 for the prior school year. And at the bottom here, there are some tables that outline the star rating score ranges for the elementary, middle, and high school rating systems. So this is a little bit more detailed look at how a star rating is calculated. The NSPF is comprised of various measures that are categorized under indicators. And then these measures and indicators are specific to each school level, that being elementary, middle, and high, but there is some overlap. So as a general example, an elementary school has a growth indicator, while a high school has a graduation rates indicator, but both share the chronic absenteeism measure. So a school earns points in the NSPF based on their performance in the measures according to point tables for each measure. Points earned for these measures are totaled under indicators, and then those are summed to generate a final score worth a possible 100 points. And then that total score, also known as an NSPF index score or index score, corresponds to a star rating from 1 to 5 based on the score tables that we showed you on the previous slide. In future slides, we'll go into further detail on the indicators and measures by school level, but first we're going to outline a few more basics. Continuing on earning points in a star rating, sometimes schools are missing measures in the system due to their grade configuration or the populations that they serve. So when that happens, an adjusted score is calculated out of total points possible. So there's an example here on the slide. If a school did not have any ELL students that were included in the WIDA growth measure, which is worth 10 points, their total index score is calculated out of 90 points instead of 100 because that measure is sort of taken out. So if they earn 75 points across all other measures, they're going to get 75 out of 90, which is 83.3 points. And then to be rated, this is important, elementary and middle schools must have 10 records in pooled proficiency measure and 10 student records in each of the 4 growth measures. And then high schools must have 10 records in math proficiency, 10 records in ELA proficiency, and then 10 records in 4-year graduation rates. So of note, some schools might not receive a rating for a certain year because of their grade configuration. For example, perhaps you are a high school that did not yet have 12th graders that graduated. So to be rated, a high school needs to have those 10 records in a graduation rate measure. So under federal law, all schools are required to be rated, but the NDE typically labels these schools as not rated until they build out to a full grade configuration. And then the NDE and SPCSA expect schools to build out to a grade configuration where they will get rated in the near future. As stated previously, indicators and measures in the NSPF are specific to elementary, middle, and high school levels. So that means a school may receive multiple ratings. There's an example here on the slide for a school that has grades K through 8, and they receive 2 separate ratings. One rating for the elementary portion, which is grades K through 5, and then another rating for the middle school portion, which is grades 6 through 8. So note that in conjunction with the NDE, the SPCSA has standardized grade spans corresponding to elementary, middle, and high, where K5 is elementary, 6-8 is middle, and 9-12 is high. Another important note is that NSPF data are validated and or submitted throughout the year by SPCSA schools, either to the SPCSA or through, let's say, assessment systems. So for example, schools validate assessment and graduation rate data, and then they submit files with chronic absenteeism data and college career readiness data to the SPCSA. Additionally, the NDE provides preliminary NSPF data for review before star ratings are officially published. So essentially, the point we're trying to make here is that districts and charter schools have many opportunities to validate data and ensure it's accurate and also correct issues before final ratings are published annually in September. Another important item regarding the NSPF is that not every student is counted in a school's star rating. Federal law, again, ESSA states that students cannot be counted in a school's rating if they have not attended the school for at least half the school year. This rule ensures that only students with sufficient instructional time are counted toward that school's rating, i.e. they are representative of that school's instruction. So the NDE uses something called year in school, or YIS, to properly count students toward a school rating. When YIS equals 1 or yes, that means the student has been enrolled at the school for at least 1/2 of the school year and therefore will count in the school rating. YIS is something that charter schools are responsible for adding and or validating during data validation processes. And it's very important to make sure YIS is accurate for students so that the correct students count in a school's rating. A school doesn't want to be a 2-star school instead of a 3-star school because 20 students that didn't receive adequate instructional time were accidentally included in their rating. Another important item is that the NSPF helps the NDE identify and support underperforming schools, which include low-performing schools, also known as Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI. There's schools with very low performing student groups, Additional Targeted Support and Improvement, or ATSI schools. And then there are schools with consistently underperforming student groups, which are Targeted Support and Improvement, or TSI. So these are required under federal law. these are the categories that NDE is required to identify schools under. So if a school falls into one of these categories, they need to address the underlying issues in a written plan. And then in a later section of the presentation, we're going to go over the criteria that identifies a school into these designations and then also allows a school to exit from those designations. The final basics item relates to how the NSPF may impact SPCSA schools. Poor academic performance for an SPCSA school may result in action by the authority, which is also known as the SPCSA board. The most severe consequences under state law for academic underperformance are mandatory termination of a charter contract by the authority, which is required when a school has 3 one-star NSPF ratings in any 5-year period. State law and regulation also provide the authority with permissive termination provisions. In these cases, the SPCSA board may terminate a charter contract for high schools that have a graduation rate under 60% for the immediately preceding school year, for elementary and middle schools that are in the lowest 5% in NSPF score statewide for the immediately preceding school year, and then elementary, middle, and high schools that receive a 1 or 2-star rating in each of the last 3 ratings or have not complied consistently with the SPCSA performance framework. So when a school level, that being elementary, middle, or high, meets these mandatory or permissive criteria, the authority has historically issued academic notices to notify a charter holder that there are concerns with academic performance, and that with continued underperformance, the authority may escalate a notice or in severe cases, terminate the charter contract as authorized under state law and regulation. Historically, the authority has issued notices of concern, notices of breach, and notices of intent to terminate in that order of severity. These levels are generally aligned with the mandatory termination criteria outlined on the slide, as well as the permissive criteria related to 3 years of underperformance. Notices can also be issued if there's poor financial and/or organizational performance, which are beyond the scope of this presentation, but we're happy to put you in contact with the right people if you have more questions about that. I do want to note that that the impacts on SPCSA schools related to the NSPF are very different than local school districts, where a school is subject to state law, where the contract may be terminated based on these criteria. Yes, I see there's a question from Dr. Amy. Go for it.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that for a alternative education high school, the graduation rate is calculated differently, and so the permissive termination is not, because also, permissive says permissive, so it's not mandatory, correct? And we can discuss that in another time.
Yeah, we can discuss that further. There is a note at the bottom of the slide here where in footnote number 1 there, charter schools that are approved to be rated on the alternative performance framework are exempt from the mandatory termination provisions. They are not exempt from the permissive termination provisions, but generally the SPCSA board takes that into account when these criteria are met. For example, we have another school, Beacon Academy, that is rated under that alternative performance framework in addition to the NSPF, and that they serve a unique population of credit deficient students. And taking all that into account, the board generally has not historically issued notices to that school based on a graduation rate or a star rating.
Thank you.
I say historically things may change, but generally that's been practiced in the past. So now that we provided a high-level overview of the NSPF and some of its basic principles, we're now going to discuss the individual measures and indicators that make up the NSPF. So here, the NSPF measures and indicators along with their possible point totals are displayed for each level, elementary, middle, and high school. With this side-by-side comparison, you can see that there's some overlap, as mentioned previously, between all 3 levels, but there are also measures and indicators specific to certain levels. For example, all 3 systems contain the chronic absenteeism measure, which is towards the bottom, but the high school system is the only one with graduation rates. During this section of the presentation, we're going to move through the measures and indicators briefly one by one by level, and we're going to discuss how each are calculated. And with that information, we'll hope you will better understand how your rating will be or is calculated. So first, we're going to start with the elementary school NSPF indicators and measures. Under the academic achievement indicator, which is worth up to 25 points, there are two measures, pooled proficiency worth 20 points and read by grade 3 measure worth 5 points. So the pooled proficiency measure is calculated from state assessments in ELA and math, 3rd through 5th grade, and then also science, which is 5th grade. Importantly, results from all 3 subject areas are pooled together. So that means math is not calculated separately from ELA. So this calculation basically sums together the number proficient in ELA, math, and science and divides it by the number assessed. And then that rate is tied to a point total using the point table for the measure. We provided all the point tables in an appendix of this presentation for your reference. But generally it works along the lines if a school has a 40% proficiency rate, there's a point table that says 40% earns, let's say, 7 points in the measure. The data sources for this measure are the Smarter Balanced and NAA or Nevada Alternate Assessment results files, which the SPCSA provides to schools once they're finalized by the NDE. One additional note is that assessment participation below 95% in math or ELA may lead to point deductions in this indicator because federal law requires 95% or greater participation in the state assessments, and the NDE has put that disincentive into place. The read by grade 3 measure is the ELA proficiency rate of 3rd graders. This measure is generally aligned with Nevada's read by grade 3 law. It's just the rate of 3rd graders that are proficient in ELA. And those data also come from Smarter and NA files. So these students are also counted in that pooled proficiency measure above on the slide. So note that ELA 3rd graders are counted twice in the NSPF, which is an indication of the importance of read by grade 3 to Nevada. So now we move to the growth indicator, which has median growth percentile measures and adequate growth percentile measures for both math and ELA. Note that this indicator is worth 35 points out of 100 total, so this weighting indicates Nevada believes growth is very important. Growth is pretty complex, the way it's calculated, but at its core, growth is calculated using at least 2 consecutive years of Smarter Balanced test scores, and it may use more years if available. An important note is that growth follows a student, which means that a student's growth data is assigned to the school at which they last tested, even if their scores from the prior year were from a different school. The NDE then takes those multiple years of scores and calculates how much growth a student has made compared to their peers across the state using something called student growth percentiles, or SGPs. Those are a number from 1 to 99. As an example, if a student has a growth percentile or SGP of 75, that means a student has shown more growth than 75% of their peers. The NDE also uses adequate growth percentiles, or AGP, to calculate if a student is on track to proficiency. So the AGP is the minimum growth a student must earn to remain proficient or be on track for proficiency within 3 years or by the end of 8th grade. The AGP can be thought of as a target. If the student has met their AGP growth target, that means the student is on track to stay or become proficient. AGPs are calculated for each student each year, so the target is annually adjusted to account for where the student has scored in the past. So after that overview, hopefully median growth percentile and adequate growth percentile measures for both math and ELA are somewhat clearer. The median growth percentile is simply the median of a school's student growth percentiles. So as an example, if a school had 5 students with SGPs of 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90, the median growth percentile, or MGP, would be 70, the SGP in the middle of the list, if that list was arranged in a numerical order. If a school has a high MGP, such as 85, that means students at the school have demonstrated much more growth than their peers across the state. The data source for this measure is the NDE Smarter growth file, which they annually provide to districts and schools. The adequate growth percentile measure is the percent of students that have met their growth targets, or AGPs. If a school has a high rate of students meeting their AGP, it means many students are on track to remain or become proficient. Sometimes a school's proficiency rate under the academic achievement indicator that we talked about previously may be low, but the AGP rate may be high, indicating that proficiency may increase in the future because students are on track to proficiency. Again, the data source for this measure is the Smarter Growth File. The next indicator is the English Language Proficiency Indicator, which is worth up to 10 points, which contains one measure, the WIDA AGP measure. This measure is included in all frameworks, elementary, middle, and high. But for the elementary, obviously, it just includes students in grades K through 5. The WIDA Adequate Growth Percentile measure is calculated similarly to the Smarter Balanced AGP, except WIDA assessment results are used instead. The measure is the percent of English learner students who have met their WIDA AGP growth target, and that tells you what percent of ELs are on track to English proficiency in 5 years or by grade 12 and a subsequent exit from EL services. There is a NDE WIDA growth file that this measure is calculated from. Next up is the Closing Opportunity Gaps indicator worth 20 points, which has math and ELA measures worth 10 points each. So these measures are included in the elementary and middle school systems. So if the growth indicator and this closing opportunity gaps indicator is added up, that's 55 points. So growth is worth more than half of the points available in the NSPF for elementary and middle schools. These measures are the percent of students that met their current year growth target who were not proficient last year. Generally, a high rate in this measure indicates that indicate a school has helped students who performed poorly last year get back on track to proficiency this year. The data source again is the growth file. The last indicator for elementary schools is the student engagement indicator, which contains one measure worth 10 points, the chronic absenteeism measure. And this measure is included across all levels, elementary, middle, and high. Chronic absenteeism may be one of the measures most correlated to success in the NSPF. Schools with low absenteeism rates are more likely to have higher star ratings because they have students in seats who are learning. The chronic absenteeism measure calculates a percent of students that were absent 10% or more of their school days. And the data source for this file, for this measure, is a data file annually submitted by schools to the SPCSA. We aggregate that, provide that to the NDE. And schools can run an infinite campus report for the submission, but the report is designed to be run at any time of the year so that schools can keep track of chronic absenteeism rates. There is an important note related to this measure because student absences for which there's a note from a medical professional excusing attendance, or if there are student absences due to religious holiday, that's up to 5 for the religious holiday, those absences do not count towards the NSPF chronic absenteeism per state law, provided that schools use the MDP and REL attendance codes for those absences in Infinite Campus. These absences are automatically removed from calculations in that report that we mentioned on this slide, but those absences do count for other state and federal reporting. So you likely will get various chronic absenteeism rates. One that's for the NSPF star rating, and then another one that is for state and federal reporting. So now that we've run through the elementary school indicators and measures, let's turn to the middle school system. Luckily, the measures highlighted in blue here are those that are also found in the elementary system. They're calculated in the exact same way as the elementary measures, except they include middle school students instead, which is grades 6 through 8. So under the student engagement indicator, instead of the read by grade 3 measure, like the elementary system, middle schools have 2 different measures there. The academic plan, learning plans measure, which is worth 2 points, and then there's the 8th grade credit requirements measure worth up to 3 points. The academic learning plans measure is the percent of students with an academic learning plan. This measure is aligned with Nevada state law, which is linked here, that requires all middle school students to have an academic learning plan. This is basically 2 free points in the NSPF, so make sure to have these plans set up for your students based on the criteria that are outlined in state law. The data source for this measure is a data file submitted by schools to the SPCSA. We provide that to NDE, And again, it's a report in Infinite Campus that you're able to run to meet the requirements. But of course, make sure to check that report once it gets pulled to ensure it's pulling accurately. The other measure specific to middle schools is the 8th grade credit requirements measure worth up to 3 points. This measures the percent of 8th grade students that met specific credit requirements for promotion to high school. This measure is aligned with Nevada regulations that state a student must earn with a passing grade 1.5 credits in both English and math, along with 1 credit in science and 1 credit in social studies during their 7th and 8th grade years. Again, the data source for this measure is a file submitted by schools to the SBCSA. Schools are able to run a report out of Infinite Campus for this one as well. Moving to the high school system, the high school, yes, I see there's a question maybe on the middle school system. Go for it, Chambrion.
Yes, so since some of our schools are starting in our slow growth model, so we only have 6th grade, so that 8th grade credit requirement, would that count? Would that be just subtracted from our score, or would our score be like amended since we don't yet have 8th grade?
Good question. So on a prior slide, we talked a little bit about adjusted scores where a school, due to their grade configuration, may not have students for a certain measure. So yes, in this case, if you don't yet have 8th graders, your score would be calculated out of 97 instead of 100, as an example.
Thank you.
Mhm. So moving to the high school system, the high school NSPF only has 2 items calculated like elementary and middle school system, the English proficiency indicator and the chronic absenteeism measure, which we're not going to go over again. The rest of the measures we're going to discuss one by one. So under the high school academic achievement indicator, proficiency measures are calculated separately for each subject area. This is in contrast to the elementary middle school proficiency measures where the results for those content areas are pooled together to calculate one pool proficiency rate. The math and ELA measures here use 11th grade results from the ACT and the Nevada alternate assessments, and it's just the rate of students that are proficient in those content areas. A few important notes here. The first is that only ACT test scores from state test dates are used in the NSPF. Results from other ACT dates, like Saturday tests, do not count in the NSPF. It's just the state testing date or testing dates. Second, similar to the assessment participation rule in the elementary and middle school NSPF systems, low school or student group participation in the assessments, which is less than 95%, may lead to a point deduction in this indicator. So you want to make sure as many students are participating as possible. And that is, again, aligned with federal law that requires 95% of students to participate in state assessments. And then third, ACT and or NA participation for students that are eligible for that based on their IEP. That is a graduation requirement. It's just participation is a graduation requirement, but it's up to schools to track this. The NDE does load ACT scores to Infinite Campus, so schools should be able to see if students that newly transferred to their school participated previously in the ACT. And I want to note that for participation meeting the graduation requirement, the NDE does allow you to count tests other than the state test day. So if a student tests on a Saturday national test day for ACT, that will count towards their participation graduation requirement, but those results will not count for the NSPF results. The high school science measure is somewhat complicated because schools may choose to give the high school science assessment in the 9th or 10th grade. As such, this measure uses both prior and current year high school science results to find a proficiency rate. It sums the number of 9th grade proficient from the prior year, the number of 10th grade proficient from the current year, and then the number of 11th grade proficient in the non-science from the current year, and then it divides it by the number assessed. The data source is a high school science file from the most recent 2 years, and then the current year now file, which again, NDE provides to districts. Districts typically provide those to schools. We provide them every year to SBCSA schools. Sorry, too far. The next one is the graduation rates indicator. That's worth up to 30 points, a significant portion of the high school NSPF. There are two measures under this indicator that are calculated very similarly. There's the 4-year and 5-year graduation rates. Both of these measures use a cohort of students that begin in the 9th grade, where transfers are added to the cohort, and then students that transfer out are removed. And then at the end of 4 or 5 years, the graduation rate is calculated. The data sources are the 4 and 5-year graduation rate data files, which are validated by charter schools during graduation rate validation processes throughout the year. Of note, because graduation rates cannot be finalized until after the September NSPF release, and that's because schools have until October 1 to graduate students to count in that year, graduation rates must be lagged 1 year in the NSPF. There's an example listed here. For example, the star ratings that are coming out in September 2024, they're going to use the graduation rates from the class of 22-23. So that means if you're a high school building out your grade configuration, that first year you have a graduation rate, you will not receive a star rating until the next year. So next we move to the college and career readiness, or CCR indicator, which is worth up to 25 points. The first two measures under this indicator, which are related to CCR participation and completion, are worth 10 points each. Essentially, these measures separately calculate the percent of 12th graders who were participants and completers in various post-secondary preparation programs during their high school career, including Advanced Placement, or AP, International Baccalaureate, or IB. There's Career Technical Education, or CTE, and then there's dual credit or dual enrollment. The data source for these measures is a file provided by charter schools to the SPCSA. We provide that to the NDE. We're not going to go into detail today about the definitions regarding participant and completer for each of these programs, but they are listed here. And note that a student can be counted as both a participant and completer in most cases. Sorry, that is confusing. If a student is a completer, they can generally be counted as also be counted as a participant. The other measure under the college and career readiness indicator is the advanced, or CCR diploma measure, which is worth up to 5 points. This measures the percent of students that received either an advanced or CCR diploma, which are diploma types beyond the standard diploma in Nevada. These data come from the 4-year graduation rate data files, which are validated by charter schools, and schools indicate the type of diploma that a student received for graduation. Because this measure is tied to graduation rates, the data are again lagged 1 year, similar to the measures under the graduation rate indicator. The last high school measure is the 9th grade credit sufficiency measure, which is worth up to 5 points. This measures the percent of 9th grade students who have earned 5 or more credits by the end of their 9th grade year. This rule is tied to Nevada regulations, also known as NAC, that specify a 9th grade student must earn 5 credits for promotion to the 10th grade. The data source here, again, is a file provided by charter schools to the SPCSA. Schools can run a report out of Infinite Campus that meets those requirements, but of course, schools should check that report to make sure it is pulling correctly. Sometimes when credits or that are tied to SCED codes or that type of thing may not always pull correctly in Infinite Campus. So at this point, we're now going to discuss where to access and how to read NSPF star rating reports. Star rating reports can be accessed from the homepage of the Nevada Accountability Portal. There's a link here on the slide. The search box can be used to find specific schools. So here we've selected an example school and search for it. And then after that search, the school's homepage is shown. Here's a range of data that can be viewed. But for this example, we're going to focus on the NSPF items. Starting from the left, the NSPF reports can be accessed under that School Rating Report tab. And then further below, there's a snapshot of the school's star ratings. And then finally on the right, there's a year menu so that past year or current year or future year reports can be found. Once on the full NSPF report page, one can switch between the school levels if needed. There, in this example, there's elementary and middle school reports available. And then if needed, you can download a PDF of the report on the download button. And then on this page, the year can be changed as well. So here's a view and an example full star rating report, and we're going to kind of walk through this. At the top left, number 1, there's information about the school, including demographics. Then in the top middle at number 2 on the slide, there's a current year score and star rating, along with prior year score and star rating. Number 3 displays more demographics about certain student populations. And then the top right at number 4 shows whether a school received a designation for low performance. That comes back to CSI, TSI, ATSI, as well as a note stating whether the school has met that required 95% assessment participation rate. The middle section of the report at number 5 includes a descriptor of the star rating, along with text describing how ratings are determined. And there's that table that displays point ranges corresponding to star ratings. And then towards the bottom are the performance data. There are dials displaying points earned in the indicators, shown here at number 6. And then the tables below each indicator show school performance in the measures, such as proficiency rates. And there's also available a district data comparison, and that's compared to the same district level. So for example, this is an elementary school report. So the district rate is showing the elementary SPCSA rate for proficiency as an example. If the indicator heading, as an example at number 7, is clicked on, and this is on the website, not in the PDF, more information can be displayed, which is shown on the next slide. It's sort of like a drill down. On the full information view, a detailed description of the indicator and its measures is provided at number 1 here on the slide. And then at the middle right, at number 2, points earned in each measure are displayed, as these are not displayed on the main report. Finally, multiple years of data are provided in the main section at number 3 for various student groups, including race, ethnicity, special education, those with IEPs, English learners, and students eligible for free or reduced price lunch. With the NSPF reports behind us, next we're going to talk about the rules for identification of low-performing schools, as well as the rules for how and when those schools can exit that identification. So as a reminder, the NSPF, the star rating system, helps the NDE identify and support underperforming schools, including CSI, ATSI, and TSI schools. And again, that's a requirement under federal law for states to identify those low-performing schools using their rating system. Schools with these designations are generally eligible for funding to address performance that are typically dependent upon written plans that address how that will those issues will be solved. Nevada issues these designations annually in the order of severity from CSI to ATSI to TSI, and schools can only have one designation, but if during a designation an ATSI or TSI school meets CSI, they can be redesignated to that higher priority designation, CSI. When a school is identified for CSI or ATSI, there's a 3-year improvement phase, which follows. Schools must develop a plan to exit. And then at the end of 3 years, there's an exit evaluation by the NDE. In the next few slides, we're going to outline how schools are identified for and can exit these designations. So the first one is Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI. And in Nevada, CSI schools are Title I schools at or below the bottom 5th percentile of NSPF index score, and that's by level, elementary, middle, high. High schools with a 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate below 67%. And then Title I schools that did not exit an ATSI designation after 3 years. So when a school is designated, they must work with their LEA to implement a plan. And then that designation lasts 3 years. There's an example timeline on the slide here. At the end of that designation, the 3-year designation, a school is evaluated for exit. And to exit CSI, a school must not meet any CSI entrance criteria. And then specifically for Title I schools originally identified as CSI under bottom 5th percentile, as well as Title I schools originally identified due to not exiting ATSI. Beyond not meeting any CSI criteria, they also must have an NSPF score in the most recent NSPF that's 10 or more points above the year in which they were identified as CSI. Generally, that rule is in place because the NDE wants to see some kind of improvement to be able to exit. Schools that don't exit are subject to more rigorous state interventions, also known as MRI, which is on the next slide a little bit. Per ESSA, schools that do not exit CSI after 3 years are subject to, quote, more rigorous state-determined action, end quote, or more rigorous intervention, or MRI. The NDE has not yet released detailed information on this, and they say more information is forthcoming regarding the requirements for those schools. Next up is ATSI, Additional Targeted Support and Improvement. These are schools with very low performing student groups. Essentially how this works is that NDE calculates NSPF scores for each student group at each school, awarding points for measures where the group is larger, is 25 students or bigger, following NSPF rating rules. And then if one or more student groups have an NSPF score at or below the bottom 5th percentile scores used in CSI, the school is designated as ATSI. So essentially, NDE is running the star rating system for student groups. So generally they run it for a school. And in this case, they're running it for each student group at each school. And if that school NSPF score is very, very low, below the bottom 5th percentile, the school can be identified for ATSI. So upon designation, school must work with the LEA to implement a plan, and this designation lasts 3 years. If during the designation period, the school meets CSI criteria, they will be redesignated as CSI because that's a higher priority designation. And then at the end of 3 years, the school is evaluated for exit. And then to exit, the student group must have a current year score, NSPF score, that's above the bottom 5th percentile NSPF score for either their designation year or the current year, whichever is higher. And if a Title I school that is ATSI does not exit ATSI, they're going to be redesignated as CSI per federal law. If a non-Title I school does not exit, they remain ATSI and are evaluated annually for exit. Okay, last one here. Targeted support and improvement. TSI schools are schools with consistently underperforming student groups. So ATSI was very low performing in 1 year. This is consistently underperforming across multiple years. So these are student groups that are greater than or equal to 25 students at or below the statewide 15th percentile by level, elementary, middle, high, that they're below that 15th percentile 2 years in a row within measures in the academic achievement indicator and 2 or more remaining indicators. The hierarchies here are shown for those indicators on the slide. And then upon TSI designation, a school must work with the LEA to implement a plan. Unlike CSI and ATSI, there's not a 3-year designation period. NDE calculates these identifications annually. And then TSI exit are established by the district. Generally, if a school no longer meets TSI in the next round of identifications, they're exited. Okay, next we're going to briefly mention what the future holds for the NSPF and then also provide resources. As you may be aware, NSPF star ratings were suspended for the 2019-20 and 2020-21 school years due to various accountability waivers from the U.S. Department of Education due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then only NSPF scores, but not corresponding star ratings were released for the 21-22 school year. And then in the 22-23 school year, the NDE went back to calculating NSPF ratings as outlined in this presentation, and they are going to be doing that for the 23-24 school year as well, along with future years. So I just want to note all that because there have been some gaps in data in the past, and you may hear about that for various reasons. Also looking to the future, many districts forgot to put this point on the slide, but it's in the notes. Many districts are trying to work with the NDE to update and or revise the NSPF to be more meaningful and or accurate. It's unclear how long that process will take, but the SPCSA hopes that feedback from all interested parties will be considered. We are part of some work groups related to that and generally try to work with our schools when there are opportunities for feedback. On this slide, we provided resources if you'd like more information on the NSPF. The first bullet has a link to the NSPF manual from the NDE. This link goes to the 22-23 school year manual. The 23-24 has not yet been released, but it is typically available on that Nevada Accountability Portal, which is linked here as well. You can find the star rating reports there as we went through on a prior slide and additional resources There are some useful quick fact documents on various portions of the NSPF. As we move toward the end of this presentation, we'd like to revisit intended outcomes. We hope that you have enhanced your knowledge of the NSPF star ratings, including its purpose and the performance it measures. And additionally, you should now know how to read and interpret an NSPF report and also understand how schools are identified into and exit out of low performance designations. And then finally, you know where to find resources, hopefully. So here's our contact information again. We do appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I know this presentation was probably a little bit longer than anyone would have liked, but there is a lot of information related to the NSPF. The appendix slides that follow here, there's just an example, a few examples, do have the point tables for the NSPF measures, where we talked about how the rates are tied, certain rate bands are tied to a certain amount of points you can earn in those measures. Those point tables can also be found in the NSPF manual linked on the resources slide, and we're happy to take any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. I think it probably would be a good idea just to verify who is on this call. I know a few of you were on the call previously. I see Vince Medina and Dr. Amy, which I think are both from Thrive Point. Siobhan from Rooted, Chambrion from Do and Be, Benjamin Feinstein, I think Vegas Vista, is that correct? And then I see a D Balak, who I'm not sure.
D would also be Thrive Point.
D is also Thrive Point, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Benjamin is correct where you have them. Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm happy to stay on the line for, if you have more specific questions. I'm going to end this recording now. And like I said, we'll send it out along with the presentation so that you can review it and share it with whoever you like. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.